Hello everyone, Lytro Storm here, and today I'll be doing another what-if scenario for Telltale's The Walking Dead. This time around we're going to be looking at Omid's shocking death at the beginning of Season 2, and undoing that in order to see what changes he makes to the story alive. Now this was actually a suggestion from a channel member named Fonklocks, or rather they suggested Omid and Krista survive, but I think it'd be better to cover both separately, so maybe we'll get to Krista another time. But for now, let's get into what if Omid survived. To keep Omid alive, I'll simply say that upon his entry, the bathroom door doesn't make the sound it did canonically. This allows Omid to grab the gun from Michelle and aim it at her. She immediately gets scared and Omid shakily tells her that she needs to leave, clearly uncomfortable with even having to aim the gun at the person. Michelle then runs off, and Omid makes sure Clementine is alright. At the same time, Krista leaves the other bathroom to see Michelle running away and rushes to ask Omid what's going on. Omid tries to ensure her that everything's okay and explains the scenario of the woman getting Clementine's gun and using it against her. Krista degrades Clem for leaving her gun unattended, saying that someone could have gotten hurt, but she stops, remembering that she is still talking to a child. Krista apologizes, saying that they should get going. The three move on, at some point running into Michelle again. She seems to have switched gears, feeling bad about what she was doing. It wasn't right to threaten a kid the way she did. She was just desperate for supplies. Omid, who tries to see the best in everyone, talks Krista into allowing Michelle to join them. Krista doesn't like the idea, so it comes down to Clem's decision. If she chooses to accept this, Krista will relent and allow Michelle into their group. And if you choose not to, Michelle gets sent away. But regardless, she ends up stealing from the group's camp in the night. But the only person awake to see it happen is Omid, who tries to convince her not to do it. But she chooses to escape with what she has stolen, and doesn't shoot Omid this time due to their prior encounter. He tells Krista and Clem about what had happened, with Krista saying that she was right about her. Sadly, Krista still loses her baby, as they've been living on scraps for a while now, and having their supplies stolen definitely did not help. This puts them in the same spot they were in the canon events, but now they have Omid present as well. Things would be the most split they've ever been between the two, as the death of their baby was quite difficult for both of them to process. Omid is very optimistic about the future, but Krista is obviously still very affected. Not as much as canon, since Omid is there to keep them together and she doesn't have to bear the sole burden of being Clementine's protector and provider. Upon seeing the campfire dwindling, Omid offers to get more wood, but Krista opts to go instead. She's been far more hands-on with things after seemingly losing her hope of fulfilling a normal mother role. Because of this choice, it is still Krista who gets caught by the bandits. Upon hearing the conflict, Omid and Clem go to check out what's happening. They discover Krista is surrounded, and Omid tells Clementine to get out of there while he does something. But he doesn't even know what to do at this point. They don't have any significant weaponry, so Clem can either just hold on to hope that he'll figure it out as she escapes, or try and help him. Clem and Omid both toss rocks at the enemies, which opens a spot for Krista to run. They run away as well, with Omid fighting off their attackers, but now they also have Krista to track down. After being surrounded by walkers, Clem ends up falling into the river, with Omid doing so as well in pursuit. Clementine wakes up on the shore to Omid trying to make sure she's alive. In the version where Clem ran alone, Omid would say that he tried finding her and Krista but got forced into the water by the bandits. They make their way around, running into Sam the dog. Omid is happy to see a dog, looking at the positive side of their situation, before saying that Krista would have loved to find one, which reminds him of what transpired the night before. Clementine makes an attempt to comfort her friend, and they continue finding food. The dog turns on Clementine, biting her arm and startling Omid. He's not really sure what to do in this scenario, but after clearing his head, he runs to the girl's aid and accidentally drops Sam onto the spike. This is a saddening sight for the duo, but Omid comforts Clementine, suggesting that they leave this behind. They need to find some sort of medical supplies for her arm before it gets infected, like his wound did in Season 1. After running from walkers, Clementine starts slowing down and fading, and so Omid carries her until they meet Pete and Luke, who help get them to safety. After Omid mentions Clementine's bite, Luke sees it and gets surprised, not knowing whether it was a walker or not. It would probably be smaller this time around, since Omid helped get Sam off of Clementine earlier than she did alone canonically. They explain what happened, and Pete and Nick take them back to their cabin. There, they have Carlos take a look, and he declares that she will stay in the shed for the night. He also says that Omid must stay there as well, as they can't risk this being a trap of some kind. Omid is extremely upset about Clementine being stuck in a shed when she needs medical care, especially since she might be all he has left. Carlos understands his feelings, but he has to think about his family as well. If she is not turned by morning, they will treat her. At night, Omid lashes out in front of Clementine as he can't take the stress of what just happened, and Carlos would rather wait things out than try and keep a little girl alive. Clementine goes into their house to try and find supplies for her arm, as Omid can't fit through the hole in the shed. She returns with the proper medical tools needed, and Omid agrees to stitch her up. It sucks, but it works. The two deal with the walkers that sneak in, and the cabin group arrives to see Clementine's arm stitched up. After that, Omid and Clem are invited inside, where they're scolded for their thievery, but ultimately no one can really blame them. Rebecca is rude to Clem and Omid, which Omid doesn't stand for, but Clem can calm it down or be ruthless, shocking Omid too. The two go on Pete and Nick's fishing trip, with Omid going after the person Clementine doesn't. He's spooked to be somewhere without Clem, as she's all he has left at this point. Pete is supportive, but Nick is just sulking, leading to Omid lashing out at him for not caring about a little girl. However, as Nick opens up about his loss, Omid bonds with him, trying to escape with him, but sadly being forced to leave him behind. As for Pete, it's the same way. Omid and Clementine return to the cabin at similar times and stay behind while the others go looking for everyone else. The two are happy to be reunited, and Omid is pretty much a yes man to Clem's decision on training Sarah. He can respect Carlos's wishes, but also recognize the need for Sarah to be prepared so that they never repeat the situation with the girl from the rest stop again. Carver shows up, and Omid answers the door, trying to be as friendly as possible. He's not exactly the best at lying though, so as Clem, you can decide to step in and help make the story more believable, or leave it to Omid to not make yourself known. Either way, Carver leaves after getting enough information from them. Carlos and the others return, with Omid briefing them on what just took place. The gang leave, finding Nick, and traveling for a while. Omid and Alvin would become friends here, as they both seem very friendly, and Omid would want to protect Rebecca and her baby to make up for Krista and theirs. They eventually arrive at the bridge, which Luke and Clementine scout first. Upon seeing Clem in danger, Omid springs ahead and tries to catch up with them, as they barely escape the walkers on the bridge. They run into Matthew, who seems like a nice guy. Nick and Omid then show up, with Omid telling Nick to put down the gun, as they don't want any trouble from this guy. Luckily this works, and our new friend Matthew gets to live. He lets them have some of his supplies before taking them up to the ski lodge. There they would meet Walter, Sarita, and reunite with Kenny as well. Omid and Clementine are both happy to see him, and everyone goes in to enjoy the night together. During their talks, Ken wonders what happened to Krista, but Omid has very little information. Only brief glimpses of her as they all tried to flee. There would be no conflict with Walter whatsoever, since Matthew is perfectly fine. So when the generator is tapped and walkers show up, Nick is guaranteed to survive, as he has no reason to let Nick die. It would also just be way easier to handle since Omid and Matthew are both here. I also think Matthew would go with Kenny to check on the generator as a way to quell Sarita wanting to go with Kenny. Matthew asks Sarita to keep track of Walter for her and then goes off. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to my friend Tyler, who's helping me out with this video and wanted to record a bit.
Carver and his men show up, taking everything into the lodge and tying them up. Clementine can choose to stay hidden with Alvin and Rebecca or run outside to find Kenny, Luke, and Matthew. Luke is nowhere to be found, but Kenny and Matthew are both hunting Carver's men. They end up killing the random goon as well as injuring Carver's shoulder right off the bat. So Carver guns down Walter, which enrages Matthew. Both he and Kenny gear up for another shot as Carver shoots Carlos in the arm to match the shot he just took. Kenny and Matthew don't back down, but if Clem went out, she can try to appeal to either of them to make them stop. No matter what, at least one of them will shoot though. The first shot barely misses Carver, and the last optional shot injures Troy. As for Alvin, since an additional shot is fired no matter what, Carver still kills him even if Clementine protects him. The gang then goes back to Hose, where Carver keeps them to do work. Omid and Matthew aren't enjoying this much more than anyone else, with Kenny being able to get Matt in on their plans to disrupt Reggie. He's on the warpath against Carver for taking Walter from him. As for Omid, he agrees they should get out, but he doesn't want to act reckless. Not much really changes in this episode besides added dialogue for Matthew and Omid. Luke rejoins the group after being found out for the radio, Kenny loses his eye, and Bonnie joins them in their plans to take down Carver, which, like in canon, they do. After Kenny has Carver down, Matthew stays with Beck to watch what happens, but Omid refuses to do so, trying to urge Matthew and Clementine away too. They eventually get going, using the walker guts to escape Hose before Carlos is shot. This sends Sarah spiraling and causes walkers to close in. Luckily, with Matthew around though, they are able to defend a little bit better, and Sarita is able to come out unscathed. Luke and Nick head after Sarah, and Nick gets shot in the shoulder, with Clementine getting separated from Kenny, Matthew, Sarita, and Mike, and would join up with Jane and Rebecca. Omid is also present as he stuck with Rebecca to make sure her and the baby were safe. They all reconvene at Parker's Run, but now Kenny is much more level-headed without the deaths of all of his new friends. They would make a plan to search the area, with Jane agreeing to go and find Luke and the others alongside Clementine. Omid decides to tag along as he wants to keep Clem safe. Because Kenny is still put together and can watch Rebecca, Mike and Bonnie can check out the history museum, but she replies that he has actual father experience, so he should watch over Rebecca. Her and Matt can handle themselves, and he reluctantly agrees, and our little squads head out. With Omid present, Jane isn't able to form as big of a connection with Clementine, but she does still try to give pointers and whatnot. They eventually ride up on where Luke and Sarah are hiding out, finding a zombified Nick stuck to a fence. They take care of it before continuing to make it on inside. Due to Omid being present and possibly holding the door, Clementine would likely get an extra chance to slap Sarah if you tried convincing her again. So you're more than likely to save Sarah. Omid would be completely traumatized if Clem leaves her behind though, wondering if they could have done anything to save her. The 4 or 5 make it to Parker's Run, where Mike and Bonnie have returned with the water. Sure, they don't have Clem to squeeze through the gap, but I think they would have tried to do so, or at least reach with their hands. The walker would have sprung up and Mike would have kicked down the door the same way he did canonically. They definitely aren't catching any raccoons though. Since Sarita and Matthew already checked out the other spot, they'd show up soon too, but they never run into Arvo as he only showed up later on. Matthew and Sarita point out that the place looks safe and it's above ground, so they should go for the night, and Kenny and the others then pack up and start leaving. They arrive to see Arvo putting a bag into a trash can before trying to leave. Kenny wants to know what he's up to, so they all approach him. Kenny is aggressive towards Arvo, but Arvo tells him nothing but the truth. The bag has medicine for his sister, and Kenny is obviously opting to take that for his own people, as there is the chance of Arvo lying. Jane does agree, and so does Rebecca, since she's the most in need of those meds. Matthew backs Kenny up reluctantly, but Luke, Omid, Sarita, Mike, and Bonnie are all at varying levels of disagreement. I think Clementine would have the ultimate decision here, so it's more or less a tie. Since they left way earlier and have Luke and probably Matthew securing the area, they would have never been attacked by the herd. Jane leaves in the night and our group would then argue on where to go out next. Sarita and Matthew are likely more willing to wait for Rebecca to recover, so it's possible that it isn't a choice when they leave. No matter what though, they encounter Arvo again with the Russians attacking them, and Rebecca would still turn, and either Clementine or Kenny handle that, which causes the gunfight. But with 3 or 4 more people in play in such close range, our group isn't going to walk away unscathed. I think this is where we would see the death of Sarita being killed in battle, and this would enrage both Kenny and Matthew, with Kenny taking in Arvo as a hostage, and Matthew would try to flank the final enemy, but luckily for him, Jane returns and kills him. Sarita bleeds out in Kenny's arms, and he cries out while holding her. After this happens, he would begin to lose his mind like how he did canonically earlier in the season, but now it's at this point in the series and he would be way more aggressive towards Arvo. And Omid, along with everybody else, would try to get him to calm down. They eventually do so, but they still tie up Arvo and continue moving on, and eventually reach the house that Arvo told them about in canon. Here, Jane warns Clem and Omid about Kenny and his downward spiral, and same with Matthew. Losing a loved one can break people, and Omid is kind of taken aback by this as she pretty much just spat in Omid's face. He's been holding it together despite having just lost Krista, and she's looking down on other people going through the same thing as him. Both Kenny and Matthew are good people, and they shouldn't just abandon them because of their pain. There's still a way back, and after Omid says that, Jane would apologize and walks ahead of them. The group makes a stop at a power plant where Clementine has to get Kenny, Matthew, Jane, Sarah, and Omid to join the fire. Kenny is pretty similar to the canon interaction as he has no reason to blame Clementine for Sarita's death since she was nowhere near her. His wound is way more raw now though, so he'd likely be easily agitated, making it hard for him to rejoin the group for the night. Jane is the same as in canon, just with her wanting to amend things with Omid. He seems nice and she didn't want to make him feel weak, because he isn't, and Clementine can offer to tell him for her or get Jane to do it herself. Matthew would be a cool one since he's obviously taking things hard, but he's not quite as far along as Kenny. As you talk about Walter, Kenny, and Sarita, he tells Clementine that he feels different from before. He sees Kenny doing reckless things and he's always right next to him. But seeing Kenny beat down Arvo makes him wonder if this is really the path for him. It'd be nice to finally see Sarah break out of her panic state, but it would probably be hard. And lastly, Omid. Despite the what if being about him, he hasn't had all that much to do so far, and I think we'd finally see him at his most vulnerable, really wondering where Krista is and if she's even out there anymore. He wishes they got to spend more time with each other and not fighting for their lives, just living them. He's been keeping his composure this whole time, but what Jane said really hit him. Omid would likely be guaranteed to return to the group as he is the people person of the group. But with that, the next day arrives, and our group would find an icy path to the house where they are forced to cross. Arvo goes running, causing Kenny and Mike to chase after. Luke gets stuck on a rough patch of ice, and Clem, Bonnie, and Matthew are left to cover him. No matter what, Luke falls in, but the changes arise here. If Clementine tried to lead Matthew from his downward spiral, he'd break the ice and go after Luke. This allows him to save Luke, sacrificing himself, and this also happens if Clementine falls in with Luke. But if Clementine instead comforted Matthew and how he isn't being reckless. Instead of telling him the truth, he would only pull Clementine up if she went under. So the combinations of survivors are Matthew alone, Matthew and Bonnie, or Luke and Bonnie. This is really cool because it means half of our group is now determinant, with Matthew, Luke, Bonnie, and Sarah. The people who fell in rest by the fire while Kenny beats up Arvo. Omid and Jane make him stop and they would find the food Arvo promised. Kenny works to fix up the truck while everyone else hangs tight and figures out what to do. Once Clementine wakes, she'd be able to interact with all of her friends. If Matthew sacrificed himself for Luke, Bonnie would be grateful for him and apologize to Clem for trying to make her help him. She wouldn't have made it. And if Matthew's alive, he'd probably help Kenny with the truck. As for Luke, he's still recovering from his leg, rib, and probably hypothermia, so he's just chilling. He's grateful that Matthew saved him and glad they all made it out. He hopes they can do the right thing for Sarah and AJ as well. Sarah herself isn't doing so hot, but she'd be feeling better if Luke is still alive. Last is Omid, who hopes Clementine can keep Kenny stable. As Clementine would then approach Kenny, Matthew says that he's all hers as he walks away to finally take a rest. Or not, if he's dead. Kenny is either glad Matthew's alive or is sad that he's dead. Or if Matthew didn't go under the water, he just wouldn't make a comment at all.
Alrighty, thank you Tyler for helping in this video, and now it's time for me to finish it up. Kenny is able to fix the truck, and everyone gathers to decide where they plan on going. In the Wellington camp, we have Kenny, Omid, and potentially Matthew. Opposed to Wellington, we've got Jane, Mike, and possibly Bonnie, Luke, and Sarah. Though Sarah isn't really getting a vote, let's be honest. Clementine can choose who to back up here, but given that Krista was heading for Wellington, Omid is not budging. They decide to sleep on it for the night, but that goes wrong when Mike and Arvo make an attempt to leave with their stuff. If Luke is dead, Bonnie will also join them, but I don't see her leaving if Luke is still there. And I also don't think Luke is going anywhere, because he's just too hopeful in the group and doesn't want to leave Clem behind. However, maybe Matthew would if you add him, since he was kinda going down a selfish path. I could also equally see him staying, due to just how much he's bonded with the group, and also Kenny is still there and maybe he wants to help his friend. But anyway, Clementine is shot, causing Omid and the others to run outside. They get on the road as soon as possible with Matthew/Luke sitting on the back of the truck alongside Bonnie if she's there. Sarah sits with Clem and Omid in the back seat and everyone is happy to see her wake up. Luke/Matthew go with him and Bonnie too if she's there. Walkers eventually show up and Omid drives away, crashing due to the snow and the dead. The three run away with AJ and possibly Sarah, eventually arriving at the rest stop. Omid and Clementine make it there first, finding Kenny alone. He says that he lost the others in the blizzard. Jane shows up too, but without AJ, causing Kenny to run away and search. Omid is freaked out by this, as AJ represents his second chance, so he starts questioning Jane rapidly. She apologizes, telling him that she'll explain later. Right now, there's no time. And she's right, as Kenny returns, angrily attacking Jane, with Omid being too shaken to react at the moment. Clementine tries to stop them, which snaps Omid back into it, and he gets in between. He tells Jane that whatever happened, she needs to explain right now, but she says she's not going to waste her breath. Kenny and Jane begin their fight, with Omid physically stepping in only to take random shots from Kenny or be dodged by Jane. Since he can't really do anything to stop them, Clem has to take it into her own hands, either shooting Kenny or letting him kill Jane. If the latter happens, Omid calls Kenny insane. Alternatively, if Clem shoots Kenny, Omid is less angry at Jane since she was mainly defending herself. But that swiftly changes when they find out AJ is still alive and Jane did all of this to prove a point. And then, Omid would call her insane. In both scenarios, he goes on a rant about how everything they just did was pointless now. They lost everyone, and they just put Clementine and possibly Sarah through that. Jane was right, some people are too far gone. He wants to get the kids away from them, but it's ultimately Clementine's decision where she goes. Jane and Kenny have the same scenes if they're left behind, but Omid would absolutely be gobsmacked on why she's staying with someone that unhinged. He doesn't want them to take AJ, but it's not looking like he's got much of a choice anymore. So Clementine leaves with whoever she chose, AJ and potentially Sarah. With Omid or Kenny, they'd go to Wellington only to find out that they can't be let in. At least only the children can. But if Sarah is there, it'd be Clem and AJ or Sarah alone because Sarah's a bit older. They find out that nobody named Krista ever joined their community, and now they know she probably never will. And with that, we can end the season off with Omid's ending being the canon one that will follow because obviously otherwise it wouldn't really change much. So let me know what you guys think about Omid surviving, and also big shout out to Tyler for helping out in the video. As always, a huge shout out to our channel members, Ellie the Plug 2, Wax and Parrot Fish, Paul Keen, Hazy Brush, Marco De Cinco, Davisville 84, Willie, Very Classy Demon, 23 Days Later, River Lamphere, Aiden Kearns, Yeah, Zombie Warlord, and Joel. If you guys also want to have your name read out at the end of the video, and as well as get access to awesome perks like priority comment replies, and early videos, please be sure to become a channel member for only $2.99 a month. But as always, tell me if you like this part, tell me what you think will happen next, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.